Once again, my name is Greg Rosenberg, and I am the coordinator for the Center for CLT Innovation. I've spent over 30 years working for and with community land trusts. While I've been very involved with the housing dimension of CLTs, I am particularly interested in the beyond housing aspect of what CLTs can do that demonstrate the full breadth and width of what CLTs are capable of. And of those things that extend beyond housing, the one closest to my heart is the role that CLTs can play in community-based agriculture, something that I've been teaching, writing, and advocating about for the past 20 years. I am so encouraged by the number of people who registered for this webinar. It is so different than 20 years ago, where there seemed to be just a handful of people interested in applying the land trust approach to urban agriculture in particular. Today's webinar will be a bit like a community garden, full of good food and community spirit, but not neatly put together like a botanical garden. I'm immensely pleased to be presenting three amazing women doing fantastic work with land trusts and agriculture. I say land trust because this is work that can be done either by community land trusts or conservation land trusts. It is a unique point of intersection between the two movements that we have only just begun to explore. First, you will hear from Heather Benham from the Athens Land Trust from Athens, Georgia, who leads the only triple mission CLT that I know of that combines commitments to affordable housing, conservation, and community agriculture, offering programs serving young urban farmers, supporting community gardens, and operating the West Broad Farmers Market. Next, you will hear from Joy Gary of the Boston Farms Community Land Trust from Boston, Massachusetts, who leads one of only two CLTs that I know of, devoted exclusively to urban agriculture, providing urban farming access to Black and brown farmers in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan, as well as financial and technical assistance. And then you will hear from Yamua Yang of Groundswell Conservancy in Madison, Wisconsin, who leads their equitable access to land program serving young farmers and farmers of color. She also developed and coordinates the Lifting Hearts Therapy Garden project for Hmong elders who are survivors of the secret war in Laos. Once they are done with their presentations, we'll have what I hope is a spirited discussion that will include questions from all of you. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box at any point in the webinar, where my colleague Joaquin de Santos will keep track of your questions in both English and Spanish. But before we hear from our presenters, we thought you should hear from the people who started it all. Charles and Shirley Sherrod, along with M. Tamanika Youngblood, who founded New Communities, the first community land trust. This clip comes from Arc of Justice, a wonderful film by Helen Cohen and Mark Lippman. You can find out more about this film on the event page of our website.
Where do you go?
The idea behind New Communities was to take civil rights one step further into economic independence and economic rights, using agriculture as the economic base. New Communities was near Albany, Georgia, in southwest Georgia. It was 6,000 acres of land. It was the largest tract of land owned by African Americans in the country at the time. So it was a source of pride.
I think Black people, even if they were not involved, felt proud that we could actually get our hands on that much land. You know, land meant power. You know, land established you as somebody.
More cooperative living, cooperative buying, cooperative selling, cooperative, just about everything cooperative.
It was some exciting times, you know, you're planning villages, you're planning education, you're planning all of these things. You basically have a chance to plan a life and lives. and plan ways to help our people.
We had a list of 500 families who were willing to live on this land the way we proposed. You would own your home, but you would lease the land underneath your home.
And now I'll turn it over to Heather Benham from the Athens Land Trust.
Thanks, Greg. I wish I could say that we got there as maybe in the same straight line that Shirley and Charles did, but we didn't. Our story is a little more circular. And so I guess that, let's see. Do we have, are my slides up? There we go. All right, so we are in Georgia, birthplace of the Community Land Trust movement, and we were founded in 1994, so we came along quite a bit later, and we were founded as both a conservation and community land trust. You could go ahead and shift to the next slide. And it's true, we are, I think, it seems like there's a few more that are getting started in this kind of format of being multi-purpose community land trust. But what I would say is, you know, we were started as conservation and community, and what we experienced over time is those are two fairly siloed populations that you're working with. So often, and I guess you can go to the next slide, you're working with either families that have owned land for generations and they want to protect that land, or families that haven't had access to land or even ownership of housing. So over time, we, and as an organization founded in the community land trust model, at least a third of our board are people impacted by the work that we do. So low income members of our community. And fairly early on in conversations, you know, you'd be talking about these two disparate activities, either building affordable housing, and we've done quite a bit of that, or working with landowners on the outskirts of the community to protect their land. And at one point we had a board member who lived in one of our in-town neighborhoods that we worked in, and she asked, there was a vacant lot where there was drug activity taking place, and she had heard about this concept of a community garden, and she asked if we could help put one in. And so we did, with partners, and then over time that turned into other community gardens, which then turned into urban farms. And I guess if you want to keep going to the next slide. And all the time that we're doing those things, we're still building homes. We are targeted in specific neighborhoods with our affordable housing work for the most part. And then around that targeted work, you start to have conversations with neighborhood residents about what else, you know, building houses and creating homeownership and taking care of dilapidated structures. That's important. So these are some of those projects. You'll see next slide. It shows, you know, where we're taking things that were burned out and building things back, taking things that were boarded up and putting life back in them. And then as that grew, we started, you know, you would do master plans with the community or charrettes with the community. And so some of the things that came out of that was, if you go to the next slide, this community garden network concept, because it was access to other land for other purposes. And a lot of, just the truth of the matter is, in these in-town neighborhoods where we work, a lot of them have old growth trees. There's a lot of shade. It's a challenge to garden even in your own yard if you have one. And so what we started to do was find opportunities within these neighborhoods where people could walk and grow food for themselves. Then that turned into an opportunity where there was a grant that the University of Georgia wrote for this community garden network that we were a part of with them. and they realized at the last minute that they weren't eligible to submit the grant. And so they asked if we wanted to. And so we tried to rewrite it as quick as possible so it made sense. And we submitted it and we received the grant. And within that grant, I didn't realize until it was awarded to us, was this concept that they had taken from Tufts University around a market garden. So a place where people could grow food to sell to help supplement their income. And that was a challenge as we got into the grant, because there were zoning challenges about growing food to sell in town neighborhoods. We were able to find a space that was zoned government, so it didn't have rules attached to it. And through a partnership, we were able to build that farm out. If you go to the next slide. And so, gardening's one thing, then getting into farming is something else. And so what we found when we had farm space and we started doing workshops was that there were a lot of people that had been farming or had farmed in the past that wanted to get back into it. And so we started networks of farmers, and we had networks of our community gardens. And then through those networks, some of what we were hearing about was challenges to grow your farm. So some of those are around USDA, which is our Department of Agriculture programs. And historically, those programs have harmed certain communities and not been the best partner to everybody. And so there's, truthfully, through lawsuits, I think they have funding set aside to try to bridge that gap. And so that's some of the work that we've done. If you want to go to the next slide. And so that's where we're trying to help farmers gain access to resources that they've normally been denied. So things like hoop houses and irrigation, and the loans are more of a challenge, but there are things that make sense for a lot of the farmers we work with. And, we're working with a lot of minority and underserved farmers. If you want to go to the next slide. And another piece of this is, as we're working with these community gardens and these urban farms, through the neighborhood input process, one of the things that we heard from young people was I think the biggest challenge had something to do with the school buses and where they were picking up and dropping off. But I think their second issue that they identified was access to jobs. And we're in a college town. And so a lot of the jobs that normally high school kids would be able to get as their first job, those are competitive because college students fill those jobs. So we created a training program where high school kids are learning about agriculture and business development, and they're getting paid for their time in the program. And then they get to keep the profits that they earn from the businesses that they create. And then they sell through our farmers market. And anyway, if you go to the next slide, which is the farmers market. So once we had this food that was being grown for people to sell, there turns out is other challenges, like the traditional farmers market in town. The barriers to get into that market, they I don't know how to say, they're more strict or restrictive on who they allow to be vendors. So we wound up creating a market to give people stair step into small business. So we provide business development classes so that folks can get the skills they need to have a successful business, or to even determine whether they want their activity to be a business or a hobby. And then big piece of our market is making it inclusive for all members of the community. So it's very diverse, and the programming is diverse to serve maybe not the traditional farmers market crowds. If you want to go to the next slide. Here's a few of our vendors. There's Miss Ethel, which Greg was mentioning to me earlier. He saw her on the Killer Mike show, Trigger Warning, on Netflix recently. So she has a soul food business that she sells to the market. Rashi's Jamaican restaurant, she actually was able to open a brick and mortar after she started at our market. And there's Seeds and Stems Farm. And a number of our vendors have moved on to start their own restaurants. Anyway, you go to the next slide. And then the farmers that we work with, like I was saying, at this point, it's pretty incredible to see all the students that have gone through our program, and you run into them. And now they're young adults with families, and they come back to the farmers market with their kids. And then some of the farmers, actually, Dejan there, he's the third from the right with his shoulder up on Willie's, or his elbow up on Willie's shoulder. He has his own farm now, Cozy Bear Farms, and so he sells through a number of local markets. So, and we were able to match him up with land. So that's another program that we started, is around land match, so that farmers who are aging out and winding down some of their farming career, if they don't have children that are planning to take over, some of them are looking for folks that might want to keep the farm going. And so we're matching folks up. Go to the next slide. And then we have the Williams Farm, which is another in-town farm. And it adjoins 5 Acre Woods, which is conservation land that we protected in partnership with our local government that has trails. And then this little over 5 acres is the Williams Farm. And then across the street, we have another almost 3 acres where we're in the process of design for some affordable housing to show kind of the breadth of our mission in one place. It'll be a bit of a model project one of these days when we can pull it all together. But right now the farm is operating really well. It's serving as an incubation farm. There are 6 African-American women that are farming on the land and growing their business, and some are getting matched up with land to expand their farm. And then we'll be hosting new incubator farmers on the land. And we have a farmer who's out there with them, teaching and supporting them. And then there's workshops and as much support and learning as they ask for, basically. And next slide. And what's next? So it's next week. It sounds like our local elected officials will be selecting. We are in partnership with them, and we received some funding through them to build out a facility that will have a commercial kitchen, so that the vendors at our market who need that to grow their business, if they don't want a restaurant, some want a catering business and they need access to a commercial kitchen to do that. We don't have one in our community right now. You have to drive about 70 miles to a commercial kitchen. So we'll be building out over the next 18 months a commercial kitchen. There will be a construction lab for one of our other youth programs that I didn't even get to tell you about, and classroom space for all of our youth activities and after school programming. And hopefully it'll be shared space with other organizations that are doing after school programming, because that's a big piece of what the community has identified as a whole here. So that's our what's next, is a giant facility with all these resources to meet community needs. So there's mine.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah.
And now we're going to go north to Boston, Massachusetts, and Joy Gary.
Thank you, Greg. I'm just gonna share my screen now. Okay, so my name is Joy Gary. I am the Executive Director for Boston Farms Community Land Trust. We're located in Boston, Massachusetts. And just to give you an overview of who we are, we were started in 2017 by the Urban Farming Institute of Boston, which is an organization that is having the mission of building farmers, so providing educational opportunities for individuals who are interested in farming, whether they're coming out of a gardening background or not. The Urban Farming Institute is a place for people to kind of get their feet wet, and they run a 12-week program for people to learn about it. And then over the summer, they can also do an internship. And so in the decade that this organization existed, there were consistent conversations within the board, in which the board is made up of community members and farmers and individuals that were in the rural farming and business sector. And there was just conversations around how do we gain more access to land for our farmers, and how can we think about models of liberation to be able to create opportunities for access of and increasing economic development within the community. And through that process and through those conversations, Boston Farms was birthed out of that. So there were a number at the time, a number of opportunities were coming up in Boston, because in around 2013, 2014, the city of Boston under Mayor Menino's administration put forth an rezoning article, which was called Article 89, and that just allowed provisions for urban agriculture to be legalized in Boston. So while urban ag was happening for 30, 40 years in under the guise of gardening, many gardeners were selling their foods to either restaurants or to local food stores. There wasn't a zoning code that allowed for agriculture, and one of the benefits of having that zoning code also allows for the city and other governmental entities to provide resources, whether it's through technical assistance or through funding, to be able to support that. So in 2014, that article was finalized, and it allowed for urban ag throughout the city. And in that process, a couple of properties that were put forth, there were two abandoned properties were put forth, and the Urban Farming Institute was able to acquire one, and that was eventually folded into Boston Farms. And then another one of the properties was taken up by Revision Urban Farm. And so Boston Farms our mission is to reclaim a lot of the some derelict land that is in Boston, to build and protect urban farms that are under community control, and specifically for Black and Brown farmers within these communities of color. And our point is to be able to reduce the barriers to access, to create collective community wealth through shared land, and fostering the growth of food and farming enterprises. So we currently own and operate 5 sites. That's an equivalent about 1 1/4 acre or a half hectare. And you'll see here some of the locations of the sites. Our service area is Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, which is largely communities of color. There is a lot of vacant properties here around the 60s and 70s, when there was a lot of social unrest, and a lot of people wanting to move out of the city, because of the integration that was happening, many houses were being burned or left in disrepair. And so it left a lot of properties vacant and left with lots of either buildings that need to be torn down or buildings that did eventually tear down and break down. And so the city actually ended up taking on many of these properties. And so they would manage them, and they are mostly city owned. And so in the past decade, the city of Boston was able to actually look at many of the properties that they owned and see where there were opportunities for urban agriculture and which ones actually were good for agriculture. Was there enough sunlight? Was there not? And so we have been able to partner with the city to be able to take on some of that land. So of our 5 properties, 4 of them were previously city-owned properties that they transferred into our organization. And then the 5th property, our Westville property, was actually a donation from a community member who his family was growing on the property for many years, and they wanted to keep it in growing, and so they transferred that property also over to us. One of the things about that's unique about the work that we're doing, aside from we're utilizing this CLT model to be able to preserve land specifically for growing farms. And we're seeing that there's just an influx of people interested in getting their hands back into the soil. The Urban Farming Institute every year is turning around 40 and 50 students who are looking for land. And so, Massachusetts is not known to be an agricultural state, but we were at one point a part of the top 5 in the country to grow and get food directly to consumers. So there's a really bustling urban agricultural community through Eastern Massachusetts Craft, through the Urban Farming Institute, and creating some programs there, and also partnering with the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture to have a bi-yearly conference to bring to garner more interest and more education around urban farming. But one of the things that we do is that we take this CLT model and make sure that the community is having as much ownership as possible over the decisions that are being made within the organization. So when we look at our board membership, we have codified many of the things you'll see here. These are codified within our bylaws that at least 2/3 of the people who serve on our board are people of color from our communities that are also residents and can be immediate neighbors, so they're directly abutting the properties. And then some of them are also farmers that serve that leased land with us. In terms of our staff, it is 100% people of color from our communities. Either they live here or they grew up in Dorchester, Roxbury, or Mattapan, and have worked here in the past. And then 75%, are our neighbors or residents. And in terms of our farmer selection, so because there's so little land access, we do have to, when people put in an application to demonstrate some interest in leasing a property, we have a process, our farmer selection process, where we have a farmer selection committee where essentially 1/3 of the committee is individuals who are neighborhood residents, so directly abutting the farms. 1/3 of them are board members, which most of our board members are from the community, and then a third of them are leasees or people who are also leasing properties. And so together they would decide what kind of farmer do we want in the community? What are the goals around this particular farmer's business model? Are they wanting to sell to restaurants only, or are they trying to provide greater access to healthy, nutritious food to our community members? And so some of those are the discussions that we have when we are selecting a new farmer for the land. And then in addition to that, we have our neighborhood advisory group. So we have a neighborhood leadership committee on the board, and advisors are individuals who have demonstrated that they have a really keen interest in what's happening in their community. We invite them to serve on the board to be able to make sure that their voice is not just heard, but that there is action and power in what they're saying. We provide a number of opportunities for the community to sort of get involved. One is land access. So we have a very low cost leases. The properties are around $50 a month for the season. And then we also provide, obviously access to infrastructure. Sometimes it's infrastructure updates, and that could be anything from greenhouses to irrigation systems. We do also provide, we're building a tool library so that farmers across sites can utilize things like the walk behind tractors or hose or different types of seeders that they may not have known about, but then we have them in our library, and so they're able to utilize that. Some of the infrastructure will also include like wash stations, which we are in the process of building out wash stations even as we speak. Storage and refrigeration units, and then we want farmers to be focused on creating viable enterprises and not kind of entangled in what it is to own land. And so we take care of property taxes, we take care of any of the infrastructure development, and then the overall maintenance of the property. In terms of funding access, we do provide no interest seed loans. So it's from $500 to $1,500, small loans for farmers to really get their businesses up and starting. And instead of having to apply for the loan and then have your credit run, we do have a credit system that is based upon relationships with people in the community, where people can give a recommendation for the credit worthiness of the person. And so it reduces the barrier to funding altogether. And then, as I mentioned before, we do have a participatory leadership model where, because we're serving in predominantly Black and Brown communities, we're wanting to make sure that the agency over what is happening in decision of the land is put into the hands of those within the community. An example of one of our farmers who is on one of our incubation sites is Sabrina Pillett-Jones. She runs a flower farm. She has a CSA model that she runs, and so weekly at front people pay for their CSA, and then they get flowers and edible flowers and herbs and teas that they can eat and enjoy throughout the season. She also runs a number of workshops on herbalism and does a number of pop-up markets. She's kind of one of our star farmers. And she's actually farming on this site, which is our Tommy's Rock Farm, which is our main sort of incubation site. And it was originally developed by Trust for Public Land. And then we're in the process of doing some additions to it. And the farmers are excited about that. An additional property that we just had, our newest development is our Westville Farms. We don't have pictures of it yet because it's in the process of still getting all of the pictures done, but this was really the site that was a unique opportunity for us to take a property that families were already using and redevelop it. And we are selecting a farmer for that now. And we're excited to see who will be farming there. We additionally link our work to strategic change by actively participating in and co-leading a number of regional networks. So we're serving on the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network as a founding member. We are on the Food Solutions Network Steering Committee, the Southern New England Farmers of Color Collaborative as a founding member and on the steering committee, and have worked with a number of other nonprofits. And our goal is to hopefully be a model for what can happen on the land, because we recognize many of the frameworks of land and development and control can potentially, there's complexities to it. And so we're trying to pull away a lot of those complexities to simplify the model. And we believe it can be a model for solidarity economy initiatives. And, you know, we're seeking to share. We just recently published a neighborhood farm development manual that kind of goes into how to navigate with city agencies and navigate on the land and look at the land to see how it can be developed and what are some of the key things that you would need to consider. And going forward, I'm just going to go through with some pictures of the farms. Going forward, we are actively looking at displacement patterns that are happening within our communities. We've known for a while that it was happening, and at least through stories with people. And so we're trying to find out where are people going, because we want to continue to serve Black and Brown communities. But if our direct community is less so, then we have to go where our people are to be able to serve them better. And yeah, so we're really excited about the future. Our hope is to be able to acquire more land around the Boston region, maybe up to 30 acres, to be able to provide more access for farmers to apply different types of models outside of vegetable growing. And that's it. If you want to contact us or find out more about the work that we're doing, feel free to take a note of our contact information.
Thanks, Joy. And now I will turn it over to Yumua Yang from Groundswell Conservancy.
All right, thank you, Greg. Again, my name is Yumua Yang, and I am the Community Director of Groundswell Conservancy. Is my slide up yet? Okay. We are based in Madison, Wisconsin, and we were established in 1983. We serve South Central Wisconsin. Next slide. These are our values, and so I'm not going to read them to all of you guys. You can just take a quick read at them. Next slide. We hold more than 90 conservation easements and have protected more than 13 acres of land. Most of our conservation easement are agricultural conservation easement with the town of Dunn, which is a town south of Madison. Next. I joined Groundswell in 2020 And I was hired to lead Groundswell's equitable access to land effort. Since joining Groundswell, I have identified what I call the 3 stages of equitable access to land, and that is getting access to land is the first and biggest barrier for BIPOC farmers that we serve here in our local area. And then land tenure, once getting on, knowing that there's land security and farmers can keep farming without worrying about losing land or being displaced. We are addressing land access and land tenure through our 2 community farms. And currently right now, I am developing a land ownership pipeline. Next. With our 2 community farms, we serve new American farmers, also known as immigrants and farmers of color. We also serve people who find healing in farming and gardening. Next. One of our 2 community farms, Paisley Swan Creek Farm, is a 35-acre property, and 14 of it is tillable. So we lease all 14 acres of it to this man and his organization called Neighborhood Food Solution. The man in this picture is, his name is Robert Pierce. Next. He runs 2 programs. One program is to serve youth, and one program is to serve adult. And so the P program stands for Program for Entrepreneurial and Agricultural Training. The FAIR program stands for Farming After Incarceration Release Program. And these 2 programs are very similar parallel programs that teach the participants how to grow food, how to be entrepreneurs, and financial literacy. Next. This is a photo of Robert and some of the youth that are in his PEAT program. Next. On our 2 farms, in addition to providing land access, we do our best to slowly build improvements on the farm for our farmers. This is a photo of a tool shed that we bought for Neighborhood Food Solution to store its hand tools and small equipment. Next. We've paved a dry path and we have repaved it so that there's better access into the farm. Next photo. We prepared a grass waterway and put a rock over the low area. This is a photo of one of my colleagues, Heidi, who's standing there demonstrating what the improvement that we made. Other things that we've done are we pay for a porta potty and trash and recycling pickup. And then we have been and are working on water access on this farm. That's a challenge of its own. Next. Our other community farm, Westport Farm, is a 10-acre farm where we lease all the land to Hmong subsistence market growers. And we also have a therapy garden. Next. This is a photo of the farm and a photo of one of our Hmong elders. At this farm, Westport Farm, the smallest growing space starts at a 1/4 acre, and the largest growing space is 4 acres. Next. So in 2021, we piloted the Lifting Hearts Therapy Garden for Hmong elders living with PTSD, dementia, and depression. You can see Greg in there. He was part of this effort. We started with 10 participants on a 1 acre or approximately 1 acre area. The 1 acre was divided into 8 plots. There were 7 elders actively growing food, and then there was a communal plot that they all help manage and weed and tend to, so that the other remaining participants who couldn't physically grow food could get food from the plot. Next. At the end of 2021, we had a very successful year. So at the end of 2021, the elders wanted to celebrate a very bountiful harvest year and just to welcome people to their space, the place where they feel the happiest and always talk about. Next. We had a whole bunch of activities at the 2021 Fall Harvest Picnic. The women elders showcased their needlework and they share stories of how they were the breadwinner for their family as they journey from Laos to the US. Next. There was also rice and corn wine tasting, all homemade. The people had to take their own risk. All right. The other activities that took place, there were other activities that took place, like how to eat, how to suck the juice from sorghum, and there was 2 veterans who shared their veteran stories, but then we ended up at the end of the event, we ended the event with a home cooked meal. Next slide. Second year, 2022, the elders want to celebrate again. In 2022, we had a fashion show. So the elders were dressed in traditional Hmong clothes, and they talked about the different designs. Their clothes demonstrate what region of Laos they were from, and then they walked around. Next slide. So you can see one of the elders walking around and waving as though she was in a pageant show. We had a Hmong cucumber demonstration, just showing the event attendees the different ways of eating a Hmong cucumber, because it's just so different from the cucumbers that you see at the farmer's market or at the grocery store. Next slide. The elders also led a garden tour, and so people had a chance to ask questions. The elders got a chance to show off the culturally appropriate vegetables that they have grown that year. Next slide. And then we ended the event with a home cooked meal again. Everybody told me that that's the best part. It's just enjoying the meal and just getting to taste. There was probably like 12 different dishes. Next slide. Before leaving the event, attendees had the opportunity to take home vegetables that were grown by the elders. And so the elders were more than happy to share their abundance of harvest with all the people that were that are supportive of the Lifting Hearts Therapy Garden. Next slide. So like Paisley, we've made farm improvements at Westport Farm. Our water access project took us 4 years, from digging a well to installing a water distribution system that's underground piping throughout the whole farm. Next. This is just a photo of the underground piping that was done last year. Next. And then as soon as the water was on and the piping was in place and the spigot was in place, one of our elders turned on the water and she was happy and watering. So I mentioned earlier that this is the land ownership pipeline is what I'm creating at Groundswell. And so some of the current issues that we are trying to address with this pipeline is that 90% of the farm is owned by non-farming landlord. Within the next 15 years, there's going to be a lot of farmland transition happening because the average age of white farmers is 57 years and older. The cost of farmland is unbelievable right now. The average cost in Dane County, where I'm at, is approximately $20,000 per acre. And as we probably all know, the most productive farmland is also the most attractive to developer. Next. I sort of put this pipeline in a very parallel line, but the work is not a very straightforward line, but the work is not like this at all. Really, the goal is to take a renter to a landowner. And so I have adopted what is called a buy, protect, sell model. And that's exactly what it is that our land trust would purchase a farm. We would remove the development rights from it and then sell it at their agricultural value to BIPOC farmers and land seekers that we're working with. And in between taking somebody from a renter to a landowner is all the technical assistance and partnership and support that have to happen in order for the farmers we're serving to become landowner. That's my contact information. If you guys have any additional questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamua. And now we're at the discussion section of today's webinar. We have about 15 minutes left, and we have some questions from the Q&A box, as well as some questions that I have of my own. So I want to go back to Heather. And Heather, Shirley Sherrod was on your board of directors. And, you know, we heard from Shirley at the beginning of the webinar. I'd be very interested to know what's your experience been of having her on your board, and how do you draw a connection between New Communities and the work of Athens Land Trust?
Well, of course, it was a huge honor to have her on the board. I was flattered. I guess because we're both working in the same space in Georgia over the years, we've built a relationship. So we call each other or email each other and ask for help or advice. And there is a connection between New Communities and Resora. You know, I don't know if everyone knows the history, which is they lost the original farm through discriminatory practices by the United States government. And they received a settlement in 2009 and purchased a new farm. And it's a place for healing, and it's a huge farm, but it doesn't have the housing piece yet, but it has the ag piece. And I think to me, it seems like such a natural transition when you're doing land justice work and land tenure work around housing, and housing stability is important, but economic opportunity is as big a piece of the puzzle. And so I'm just, I guess, happy that our journey has led us to the same place she was at, 50 something years ago.
Mm. Yeah, I just think that's so cool. Joy, you had mentioned Article 89, which is Urban Egg Zoning Code. And I just wanted to know, what are kind of key elements that need to be in a zoning code to allow urban farming to occur?
Yeah, so I think some of the things, if I remember correctly, some of the things that it was solving for was distinguishing the difference between vegetable growing and keeping chickens and keeping honeybees, which are things that people wanted to do. The zoning code didn't have the legal power to make the honeybees and the chickens just readily available, because they were preceding codes that they couldn't really get rid of. So it allows for a variance for those provisions, but it also looked at things as soil health. So is the soil healthy, and how can you build the farm with that consideration? looking at the height of structures so that they're not obstructing view from either from the street or obstructing things for their neighbors. And then I think those were the main ones around. It was around soil health and where they could be and like the obstruction of different structures.
Thanks, Joy. I can attest to the importance of urban ag language being in zoning codes. I helped rewrite the zoning code here in Madison, Wisconsin. And yeah, I got deep into chickens and bees, and bees are much more popular now than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
People understand the importance of pollinators. I want to go to you, Yamua. And, I have to disclose I'm a volunteer with Yamua and with the elders. And I just wonder if you could speak a bit more of the healing dimension of this garden project. These are all folks who are survivors of the secret war in Laos, who I think almost all have diagnoses of severe post-traumatic stress disorder. And really, we thought of this initially as just part of a mental health program. So it kind of overlaps between mental health and agriculture. And I just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so like Greg mentioned, there's a mental health component to the Lifting Hearts Therapy Garden, but after piloting it, we noticed that it's beyond mental health. There's just so many more. The garden provides more than just mental health healing. It provides food security. It's a form of connecting generations of families together. So the elders are the one that have the growing skill sets and they're able to enjoy the space with their kids and grandkids. It's the healing garden is a form of pride for the elders as they have lost that role and being the breadwinner and being the main provider and just being able to grow food and making sure that the kids and grandkids and community members can enjoy the food that they're growing. That's a sense of pride. It makes the elders feel that they serve a purpose. It's also a space that they're very, very proud of and talk about all the time. It's a space that they invite anybody that talk to them about therapy garden to the space, it's their happy place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have had the experience of seeing some of the elders who walk with canes, walk very slowly, drop their canes when they get to the edge of their garden, and then they just go in and garden all day long. And it's really quite remarkable. All right, I want to get to some questions that have come in through the Q&A, and we're not going to be able to address all of them, but one question that seems pretty foundational is how do you fund all this cool stuff? And who wants to take you're all welcome to weigh in, but who'd like to take the first shot at that? Heather, you were rolling your eyes, so you could start.
Okay, thanks. Shouldn't roll my eyes. It's a challenge, right? That's the truth. At least for us it is. And it's a mix. We're constantly having to hustle and find funding. So, for one of the farms, it came with a couple of houses. And so we've rented those houses out to provide income to pay the mortgage on the farm. And maybe one day we'll get it paid off and that'll feel great. We're constantly applying for federal grants. And so we apply for quite a bit of USDA funding to support some of the work. There's private foundations, but it's a never-ending struggle. I don't, this idea of sustainability and The idea that farms are going to generate enough revenue to pay for themselves while you're educating the next generation of farmers and supporting people with access and trying to provide healthy food for communities that have been left out. It's, at least I haven't figured out the formula where that all adds up, or else I would hope that everybody would be doing it. So I wish I had an easy answer. It's just a mix of things.
Joy Arimua?
I can go. I think we have a mix of funding sources. My position was paid for by a foundation, and then and part of my salary was paid for by a foundation, and the remaining was fundraised for. Community land trusts usually get funding support from individuals, and so that's where most of our funding sources come from. In terms of our farm purchase, the two community farms, both former landowner sold the farms to us at a bargain price. And so one of them was at a half a price and one of them was at 2/3 of the price. We use individual gifts, and we also tap into a conservation fund through the county to purchase these two farms. In terms of projects and improvements on the farm, they were all grant funded, and they were all, I would say, like foundation fundings, or we had small city and county fundings. And so like pots of money put together to make the projects possible.
Yeah, I can speak somewhat to how we're funded. So we have a few sources. So I did mention, because there was a question about the city. So a lot of our projects in terms of the development or the acquisition of the land, because most of them are city-owned land, we receive those almost free of, like for $100 from the city, and that's how they do their disposition process. But in terms of developing the sites, Grow Boston, which is the urban ag department within the city, does provide up to $100,000 to develop urban farms and community garden plots. And so we take advantage of that. We also, our organization did a lot of legislative work to help the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture create a fund. So now they have an urban ag fund, which you can get up to $200,000 to $500,000. So we do take advantage of that. But then we also have a number of organizations, particularly EFOD, the Equitable Food Oriented Development, that really supports our operational work. And then we do run a few events, 3 events a year. So we try to keep it a little bit diversified where we're doing our events, we're cultivating donors, and then we are, seeking out different grant opportunities. But we're looking for more sustainable models that will allow us to be able to utilize some of the skills that we built in terms of developing farms and, provide that as a service to other organizations that are not, necessarily doing our work or even work within the city.
Thank you, Joy. I have a feeling that we have folks in attendance who are interested in agricultural programming, but haven't done it yet. So the question is, how do you start? And for the 3 of you, you all have considerable in-house expertise when it comes to agriculture and can run your programs with the staff who work for your organizations. My question is what if you're a community land trust that's done housing, want to get involved in agriculture, don't have any agricultural expertise? Can you do it through partnering, or do you need to develop the staff capacity internally to do that? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Whoever wants to answer.
Go, Joy. Yeah, go.
Oh, I'll say really quickly, I think it can definitely be done through partnerships. But I think if your organization, if agriculture is not your role, you would need someone who is going to consistently sort of consult with you with an understanding of what it means to own farmland, what is the supports that the farmers may need. But you can definitely do it through, I believe you can do it through partnerships, but I'll let Heather speak more.
I think what I've seen over time is it probably depends. It depends on where you're at. So if you're in Boston, there's probably a lot of organizations that have a lot of capacity that are specialized in certain things, right? But if you're in a more rural area, you might not have that same luxury of opportunity. Now, sometimes there is existing agriculture expertise, but the question then is, who have they traditionally been serving, and who are they structured to serve, and why haven't they? Maybe they've been serving the communities of color historically, and what's likely to make that change. So some of it is around yes and or no but, I don't know which way, but it's thinking about, okay, there are places to plug people in, but you're going to have to coach and encourage and maybe be a mediator sometimes, and other times it might be better to build the in-house capacity so that you can actually serve people in the way they need to be served.
That makes sense. Imua, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do want to give an example. So before I joined Groundswell, I was that person that Groundswell worked with. So when Groundswell bought these 2 community farms in 2018, that they'd never done anything like this before. And so they have no idea how to work with farmers. It was farmers of color. Like I said, our Westport farm is all Hmong farmers, and then they leased Paisley to a Black farmer. So then they partnered with me when I was at another organization to provide that expertise. And so I've seen it done. I wasn't able to provide the in-depth support that was needed, but that partnership where Groundswell and my former organization worked together to secure funding so that I could play that support role for Groundswell. I've seen that to be successful, and it works. But like Heather said, if the organization chooses and is able to dedicating in-house support to the agricultural programs activities is probably the best way to go, but it's not impossible to partner with others.
Thank you. And now we're at time for today. So I want to wrap things up. I want to let folks know we've recorded this webinar. We'll make it available in the next few days, along with some other resources. And also there's a number of questions that we weren't able to answer. So we'll do our best to get you information to address those questions. When the webinar ends, a survey will pop up. We'd really appreciate it if you'd fill it out. And to show our appreciation, everyone fill it out. We'll get a copy, a digital PDF copy of our latest publication, Community Matters. It's all about putting the C in community land trust, and that's community organizing. And so on behalf of the Center for CLT Innovation, thank you for coming. We hope to see you all again soon. Thanks.